David Bird here, cognitive hypnotherapist and mindset coach at dbch.co.uk. And today I'm going to talk to you about confidence, and I'm going to do some myth busting around that because I want to redefine it. I get people coming to me asking about lack of confidence, and for me there's a lot of misunderstanding around what it is and how it works. So I put together a bit of a presentation for you on that. So bear with me. So, confidence, why it isn't real, or at least it's not what we think it is. So people come to me and they'll say, I need to be more confident. Maybe they're scared about something in particular, or just possibly scared in general. Well, for me, when we look at what confident means, the definition of confident is being certain of your abilities or having trust in people, plans, or the future. And here are some of the key words that come up: strong belief, assurance, certainty, conviction, trust, right? It's about this sense of knowingness, certainty, right? It's this idea that I know. And for me, importantly, what I want to make the point is that confidence it's not an identity thing. It's actually contextual. So when we think about brushing our teeth, for example, now we don't describe ourselves as confident at brushing our teeth, but we are, because we're all sure that we can brush our teeth, right? Other things like getting out of bed in the morning, or walking, or going up the stairs, getting dressed, even tying shoelaces, right? These are all things that we can do. We're sure that we can do them once we can, unless you've got some like physical impairment or something. When you think about tying your shoelaces, like if you've got a kid that's not learnt yet, like it's literally like a magic trick to them, right? They can see you doing this thing with your hands and creating these loops, and it's like, wow, how do you do that? I remember actually trying to learn how to tie my shoelaces and finding it pretty difficult. Whereas now, don't think about it. It's just something that I do. And it's the same with driving. If you've been driving a long time, you just don't think about it. We could say that we're confident drivers, but we don't think of ourselves necessarily as confident drivers. You just get in the car and you go where you want to go. You get to a junction and you just do what you do when you get to a junction. And yeah, you're looking, but you're not thinking about, hang on, hand here, foot here, and brake and mirrors and all that stuff. You just do it. But if you remember your first driving lesson, it was probably quite a different story. Or at least it definitely was if it was anything like mine. So my first driving lesson, I was on an industrial estate actually, and I sat in the car, and the guy's, I think he's even got this little like map out on these toy cars, and he's explaining it to me, and it's like, yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. And then it's like, right, now we're going to drive. I'm like, okay. But about 50 meters down the road, there's a roundabout. I'm like, fuck, it's a roundabout. There's other cars. What do I do here? Well, I somehow managed to get around the roundabout, but then I nearly curbed the car because there's this bloody massive HGV, this lorry coming at me. And of course, first lesson, I'm not realizing like perspective and the size of the car. I've not got that in the muscle, as it were. So I'm trying to turn into the other side of the road, and like I said, nearly curbed it. And he's like, there's white lines. He's not going to hit you. But again, first lesson, I had no experience of that. And this leads me to this model of learning that I want to talk to you about. It's called the Hierarchy of Competence. And it starts from bottom and then we move up to the top. So the first level is unconscious incompetence. So this is I don't know what I don't know. Right? And if you think of this in terms of driving, this is like where, well, I don't drive, but I don't even need to think about driving. Like I'm younger, for example, and mum and dad or whoever, they just give me lifts everywhere. So driving's not my problem. It's something other people do, right? But then on first driving lesson, this is where we move up to this sense of conscious incompetence. So this is now very quickly, I'm consciously aware, whoa, I can't do this. And this is where we can get a sense of overwhelm sometimes. So especially something like driving, if you think like you've got to do something with all your limbs, and then you've got to think about the road and the mirrors, and there's all this stuff to do, very quickly the intellect's like, I can't think about all that at the same time. which is why, you know, the driving instructor has their own set of controls to kind of help you along while you're learning it, because it is too much all in one go. But interestingly, this is the bit where people can get stuck with something new or with certain experiences where they haven't moved further up the ladder, because that overwhelm can trigger fear or a sense of anxiety in someone. You know, it's this lack of safety. And if you then, and naturally, we often then want to pull away from that, because it's like, well, get back to safety, get back to certainty. And especially if there's certain beliefs there around like who they are and what they can do, can't do. Like if somebody believes they're just not good at doing stuff like that, then it can almost it can reinforce that belief. And you may have found somebody who you know, I definitely know of a couple of people who've said, well, you know, I'm just not very good at driving, or I couldn't learn to drive, I can't do it, it's not something I can do. Like, it's in their language that that's just something about them, even though loads of people have learned to drive, they can't. And if you talk to them about it, you'll find that they had some number of lessons, often not very many, but because they found it difficult, because the fear was too much, this, you know, basically they got stuck at that level of conscious incompetence. The beliefs and the fear fed into it, and then they stopped going. They didn't continue to move up the ladder. So once we get past that stage, though, of conscious incompetence, then we move up to conscious competence. So this is this sense of, okay, I've got it, sort of, but I've got to concentrate. And that's often the level, it's definitely the level that I was at when I was actually even taking my driving test. Like, a lot of it was in the muscle, but I had to stay focused. And you find this with people where you know, if we're driving somewhere, say that we don't know, you know, people will say sometimes, like, they'll ask the person next to them, like, oh, hang on, can you give me a minute? Like, they'll ask them to stop talking. Or, you know, I've even seen it in memes where people laugh about, why do we turn the radio down when we get near to someone's house we're looking for? But it's because that's extra information, like that's extra noise, if you like. We turn the radio down, we turn the music down, because it allows us to then engage the intellect, because we're not on autopilot. You know, when you're just driving around somewhere, you know, you're not thinking about it. But that moves us up the ladder. When we're at that stage, that's unconscious competence. That's the final stage. That's when it's really in the muscle. That's where it's like another day at the office. And if you think about, if you're just driving around your local town, or if you're driving to the supermarket, you just get in the car, you've got, you know, whatever on your mind, you probably don't even remember the journey, because you're just driving. And it's only then if something complicated comes up along the road, maybe there's roadworks, or like I said, if you're having to follow the sat nav, that we engage more of the intellect, and we kind of come back, you know, down almost in a way to that conscious competence state. So this also moves across to other areas as well, and it's not just driving. If you think about first day at a new job, you can have somebody who's been in an industry for a while, like they know how that kind of thing works. They've passed the interview, but first day at the job, it's like, oh, they're confused. There's stuff they don't know. Maybe it's a new computer system, or common one is like, everybody's just using this lingo and talking about, like, as if they know the ropes, and you're the newbie that really doesn't. Like, it takes some time to learn. But again, it can be scary for some people, or another way, if it's not scary, it's frustrating, but it's that same sense of, I just don't get it. However, stick at it long enough, and again, it's, you know, it's another day at the office. Someone that's been there 3 years, they don't have to think about it. And if you've ever been at a job long enough, you'll see this with new people coming in, where they're having to learn. You know, if you try and teach someone a job, and after you've been there a few years, it's like you try and teach them the basics, but there's always that random stuff that comes up that is somewhat experienced, but also it's like, well, it's like experience of having been on the job and then being able to deal with those challenges that come up, but that a newbie can't just know that, right? But that sense of knowingness comes with that moving up that ladder to unconscious competence. So what I propose to you is that confidence, or that the sense of being confident, is actually just a perception from the non-confident position. That confidence itself isn't really a thing. as such. It's a perception from the non-confident position. So this scared kid here, see, he's looking at Superman and he's going, wow, man, look at Superman. He's so confident in what he does. But Superman's not confident. He's not thinking about being confident. Like, he's just being Superman. He's doing what Superman does. You know, if as a young kid watching someone tie their shoelaces, you'd be like, wow, you're really confident at tying your shoelaces, but you're just tying the shoelaces because you know how to do it. Same as the driving. Anybody who knows what they're doing is just doing it. They're not necessarily thinking of themselves as confident. That's why there's this sense of ease that comes with it, because there's this lack of thinking. And this is why, for me, I would describe confidence, it's an absence of insecurity. There's not this worry, this intellect trying to come in. It's just being present in the moment and doing it. It's like, in a way, it's like letting your embodied understanding, letting your wisdom, letting your, you know, or you might even say your unconscious, just do it. That's where that unconscious competence comes from. Or getting out of your own way is another way of putting it. Another way of thinking about confidence is that there's this sense, this deeper sense of, I know how this works, and that I can handle any uncertainty that comes up. And this is what I was talking about in terms of, if you've been in that job for a while, you know, if you've been doing, because, you know, for a lot of jobs, challenges still come up, right? Even if you've been there for a long time. And that can be what keeps the job interesting. But there's often this deeper sense that it's like, I know the pattern, I know the terrain. So even though difficult stuff might come up, like, there's this sense that I know I can handle it. Whereas first day on the job, often there may not be, especially if it's a completely new industry. It's like, I've got no reference for this at all. So I don't have this sense that I can handle it, and I don't know how it works. So for confidence then, what's the missing link? Well, for me, it's courage. Courage is the missing link. And courage is described as the ability to do something that frightens us. Or another word for it is bravery. And some key words that come up with courage are withstanding danger and fear, facing difficulty, and the willingness to confront uncertainty. And a good example here I like to think of is Nemo's dad, Marlin, if you think about the Disney movie Finding Nemo. And he was terrified of everything, right? He was always like, oh, Nemo, what about this? And Nemo, careful of that. Nemo, careful of this, right? Until his son goes missing. And then he went out to find his son, even though he was absolutely terrified. And I know there was that whole, comic relief thing of Dory she's just like, oh yeah, well, we're just going to just do the really scary thing and go over here. But the point is that Marlin still followed her anyway, even though he was terrified. He didn't stay at home with his head in his hands. It's the key with courage. It's this sense of, I'm scared, but I'm going to do it anyway. It's not about getting rid of fear. And there's this common misconception that, you know, when I was younger, probably even not that many years ago, I used to buy into too. Even when I was first training as a therapist, I thought it worked like this. There's this idea about you have to get rid of the fear, you have to delete the fear, and it just doesn't work like that for me. Now, sometimes it can do. You know, if you've got, for example, if you're working with certain traumatic stuff, it's possible that there's a certain fear associated with something in memory, and then you can sometimes, just by talking around that and working in a certain way, you can kind of release fear. But in the experiential world, it's like, if something looks scary to you, then you can't just get rid of it. It's courage that's needed a lot of the time, which, again, like I said, it's this sense of, I'm scared, but I'm going to do it anyway. And so to give you some examples, like, here are some of the things that we can experience fear about, but then we need courage to do them. So skydiving, watching scary movies for some people, bungee jumping, going to theme parks and roller coasters, or even for some people, going to the dentist. Now, for me, I actually jumped out of a plane a few years ago, was with a group of people, and I was terrified about it. even though logically I knew I was going to be fine, right? The people that I was with, some of them had done it before. There were some instructors there that were very, very experienced. They took us through all the safety stuff. And even though I'd watched some people that I knew go up beforehand and come back down laughing, I'm still terrified. And it's because there was no way that I could have been confident about jumping out of a plane, because I had no embodied experience of that. I only had like a conceptual understanding. I'd been explained to me that it was safe. Logically, I knew it was safe, but as far as my mind was concerned, I might die. And that's kind of what was still coming up, those feelings of fear. And it was only actually the point of, as the guy that I was in tandem with, as we jumped, I was most scared when we were sat on the edge of the plane, and as soon as we went over, bang, like fear disappeared, and I was just hit with this exhilaration because I was then falling. But there was no way that I could have that could have been explained to me. I had to experience that to then go, oh, okay, well, now I'm not terrified of skydiving anymore. Like, I wouldn't necessarily say I was confident because I've only done it once, but the point is I had to use courage. I had to be scared and do it anyway. So for me, the way I would describe confidence is it's an embodied understanding that I can trust, right? It comes from using courage and practice to gain experience. So I like to think about riding a bike is another good example here. So you can conceptually talk about balance to somebody. You can try and explain balance to a kid, but you can't teach it. You can't teach balance. A person has to find their own balance. And yeah, they may well fall off their bike, and most people do. And you can do all sorts of things to kind of help with that. You know, you can use stabilizers, and then you can put a helmet on and have shin pads and all that stuff to make it less of a leap of faith and more of a, you know, a step forward, as it were. But at some point, the person still has to get on the bike. You can't teach that conceptually. You can give pointers, but they have to learn it themselves by doing. So this comes to this point I was talking about, moving from conceptual or no understanding to an embodied understanding. This was me skydiving, for example. I went from terrified to having done it myself to, okay, now I've got an embodied understanding of what it's like to jump out of a plane. Same as driving. Moving from that first driving lesson of, holy shit, I can't drive, to then having the courage and the practice of going back each week, however many weeks I did it for, until I got an embodied understanding of how to drive. Or even something as simple as tying shoelaces. Again, first day at the job, keep doing that, keep turning up, keep putting the practice in. It turns into this embodied understanding of I can just do it and I can deal with stuff. Now, some people are scared about their jobs. This is where kind of imposter syndrome and stuff can come from. Someone's promoted to promoted to your level of incompetence. If people turn away from that challenge, and then because of their stuff and their buttons and beliefs, they're not then open about needing to learn and where they're at, they turn away from using courage and putting the practice in, so they have difficulty gaining that embodied understanding. But for other people, it can turn up as, or it can show up as frustration. There's this resistance to it. It's like, which is often this sense of, I should be getting this quicker than I am. I should be at this embodied understanding before I actually am, if that makes sense. Like, there's this belief about, I shouldn't have to put the practice in. Not that it's often languaged out like that, but it's often a belief that because they're not already at that place of unconscious incompetence, it means something about them, even though they've only been doing the job 5 minutes. And again, same as, driving that I was talking about. So for me, the big thing here is that courage is actually a skill. Courage is a skill. And like anything, it can be learned. We can get better at it and we can get rusty at it at the same time. It's this sense of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, or getting more certain with being uncertain, is the way I like to think about practicing courage. And for me, often it can, the thing with courage is that, or courage and fear is that it can it doesn't necessarily move across different contexts. So you can still have the same sense of, okay, this is something else I've got to use my courage at again if you move context. So, for example, somebody who goes to a new job in a new industry may find, oh, there's all this stuff coming up for me again. I've got to use courage to, practice and put the effort in and get to that place of unconscious competence. Now, if that person changes jobs a lot, they might find then that they're better at changing jobs because they're used to that, right? But then if they then try and do something like start learning to drive or jump out of a plane or do something else difficult, those skills or those embodied understandings don't necessarily move context. So they still might have the same fear coming up, and they've still got to tap into that sense of courage like anybody has to. So for me, practicing courage. It's not finding confidence. That's the difference. People say that, oh, I need to find my confidence. Actually, what's needed is to practice courage. But what gets in the way? Well, a few things can get in the way for me, because obviously it's not always as simple as that, as just be courageous. For me, fear's the big one that gets in the way, a fear of discomfort or the fear of the fear. Now, I know that kind of almost sounds a bit obvious because it's like, well, the reason I've got the problem is the fear. But to break that down a little bit, it's that sometimes the step is too big. It's like sometimes what you're looking at looks really real, like it looks like a leap of faith. And so sometimes that's too much. I like to think about, it's like if you're standing on the edge of a cliff and someone's like, oh, just step off, it'll be fine. It's like that Indiana Jones movie, I forget which one it is. It's like, step out and the bridge will appear. It's like, unless you've seen someone else do it and the bridge appear, you need a lot of faith that you're going to step out and that bridge will appear, right? So sometimes the step is too big. But leading on from that, sometimes it's about, the reason that can be is because we're trying to do it on our own. It's really common that if we try and do something on our own, it feels bigger than when someone else is involved, or when we're getting some kind of help and support, or even just when there's just someone else there in some capacity, even just sharing it with someone else. And for me, I want to talk about this place of comfortable misery that I find, which is the brain would rather, a way of thinking about this is the brain would rather that we're miserable and alive than happy and dead, right? It comes from the old animalistic part of the brain. And so we can get stuck in this place of comfortable misery of like, well, I'm not happy here, but I'm more scared to move. It's that kind of thing. But again, what feeds into that is this, okay, well, how do we make the steps smaller? How do I get someone else involved? That kind of thing to make it easier to tap into courage. Beliefs are the next thing that can get in the way. So a way of thinking about beliefs are that they're the story that we use to explain our fears. A real common one was, well, I just can't do that, or I just can't do this. I'm the sort of person that this, I'm the sort of person that that. When we have those stories that are well run and we believe them, they help explain the world to us, but they can also kind of wrongly explain why we can't do something. So I can't actually think of an example off the top. Well, okay, come back to that driving example. If I get in the car and I know that driving is difficult, not just for me, but for everybody, because I've talked to a bunch of people, then even though I might be unhappy about it being a tough process, frustrating, scary, or whatever, on some way I'm more likely to have the belief that I'll be able to do it if I keep at it, right? But if I believe that I just can't drive, that I'm rubbish at this sort of thing, then why would I carry on? And that belief, in a way, it helps protect me from putting myself in harm's way and helps protect me from feeling bad or feeling scared or whatever it is. But it can keep me stuck because it stops me tapping into my courage. It stops me putting in the reps, it stops me doing the practice to kind of move, to being able to break that belief, as it were, and to move through it. Another thing that can show up in the area of beliefs is expecting it to be easier than it is, or different than it is. And this is what I was talking about before about first day on the job, that kind of scenario where someone's get frustrated because they're thinking they should be further up that ladder of competence than they are. See, if I expect I should be better at this than I am, then I might start to think that it's about me, or that, you know, I'll have some other explanation about it. So I had this for years with playing music, with learning guitar. I would often expect myself to be better than I was, so I get very frustrated very easily, and then and disheartened, and I wouldn't practice stuff as much as I should have done, because I'd start playing a piece of music, be upset that I wasn't brilliant at it, and then I'd be like, oh, that piece is too hard for me. It's like, well, yeah, but that piece is too hard for anybody that's not been playing very long and has only played it for 10 minutes. But if I've got a belief around that, rather than understanding how, you know, it really works in terms of that model of learning and needing the practice and the courage, then I'm going to respond to it very differently. And then you can also get this kind of off the back of that, this magic pill thinking, which is like, I just need that one thing to change everything. And that's like this sense of, I'll just wake up confident one day. You know, and you sometimes get this in terms of hypnotherapy as well. There's this kind of there's still, for some people, there's still this kind of myth peddled that it's like you can go from being absolutely terrified of the entire world to having one hypnotherapy session where you're put into a deep trance and you wake up confident and you can just do absolutely everything and, you know, live your wildest dreams. And it's like, it doesn't really work like that. Yeah. So, and finally, the last thing that can get in the way for me is identity, which kind of is linked to beliefs, but it's a bit deeper in that it's a sense of, often it's a fear of losing who we are, or the fear of who I'll be if I change. You know, because a lot of it's like if I believe I'm not the sort of person that can do this sort of thing, like if I'm the sort of person who can't drive, who will I be if I then can drive? What else does that, you know, expose me to? And it sounds a bit mellow. I won't go in too much into this now, but the way I like to think about it is that our ego is like a software program that runs in our brain, runs in our consciousness, and it's very dramatic. And that with every fear, if you extrapolate the fear out, it's always like, well, then I'm going to die. It always thinks everything is in terms of like life or death, and anything that affects our sense of identity, of who we are, is like a life and death situation, because it kind of really it shakes the foundation of what we believe about the world and who we are in it. And it creates a lot of uncertainty there. So anything that affects that will be quite a problem. So here are some questions that I like in terms of when we're looking at fear and confidence. What if it was okay to fail, get it wrong, be rubbish at it for a while, or be scared? Now, I like this question because often we can get stuck at the fear stage and not move past it. So it allows us to go, okay, well, what if it was okay to do those things? And generally it doesn't make us go, oh, well, that's great, then I'll just do it. But it helps us to kind of inspect, well, what am I really worried about? And what if I wasn't worried about those things? It just allows us to dive in a bit rather than just get blindsided by the fear. And secondly, what's the next smallest step I can take? And again, this stops us getting stuck in the big picture of, oh my God, that's terrifying, it's too big, it's, you know, the overwhelm stage, and starts looking at, well, if there was something I could do, what would that be? You know, and in terms of driving, yeah, okay, it can be massively overwhelming to sit in the driving seat for the first time, but it's like, if you can focus on just, I don't know, getting to the end of the road, for example, that's a goal. It's that kind of thing. And finally, who else can help me out with this? And this is what I come back to before. When we're trying to do things on our own, it's tough. We can get this sense of feeling alone with something that comes with being stuck with a problem. You know, we start thinking about something that brings us a lot of fear. We have to feel alone with it. We can really feel the weight of it. These are the kind of metaphors people use. And it's amazing how when we start even just talking to someone about it or involving somebody else, that we start to feel better about it because we feel less alone. And coming back to the driving example, I do believe the reason why a lot of people find that easier to do is because, other than the fact that, people will say, well, everybody needs to drive, which isn't necessarily true, because some people manage fine without it. We all know someone who's gone through, or multiple people who've gone through driving tests, gone from not being able to drive to be able to drive. So when we talk about it, it's we don't feel alone with it. It's a common thing. There's a lot of wisdom in that old saying, a problem shared is a problem halved. So, is this something you're looking for help with? Are you looking for help with fear, anxiety, lack of confidence, or tapping into your courage? If you are, this is the kind of thing that I work with my clients on, basically. So if you're looking for help, feel free to jump over to my website at dbch.co.uk and send me a message. That's dbch.co.uk. So I hope you've enjoyed this presentation about confidence and courage, and I will see you soon.